Welcome everybody to our webinar today. We're going to be covering how to write great content. We are SilverTech, digital marketing agency working to redefine how businesses engage with and understand their customers. I am your host, Ian Hughes, content strategist here at SilverTech. I write for SilverTech's blog, podcast, and our webinars. I'm joined again by Samantha Maltis, SilverTech's principal strategist, marketing manager, and content writing expert. Welcome, Sam.
Thanks, Ian. I love your new picture.
Everyone, this is the first in our Inbound Summer School, our Lead to Loyal Inbound Summer School webinar series. So first, what is Lead to Loyal? It's creating valuable digital experiences at each and every touch point from first interaction through repeat business. And by understanding each individual customer interaction, Lead to Loyal allows businesses to navigate and optimize the customer experience better than ever before. It's about aligning these things, the SEO, SEM, web and mobile, content marketing, email marketing, social media marketing, all of which require a healthy amount of effective content writing. The agenda today, here's what it looks like. First, we're going to answer the question, what is content? We'll spend a little time getting to know your audience. Then we'll go over how to write tasty, audience-centric content, and then close with some blog and email best practices. What is content? As modern marketers, we've accepted content as a catch-all for almost every aspect of our work. The emails we send, the blogs we write, and the social posts we craft. And of course, the accompanying images, infographics, and videos. At SilverTech, we combine the meaning of content with its heteronym, content, to arrive at the following definition. A message that prompts action designed to deliver a state of satisfaction.
Which I absolutely love. So a message that prompts action designed to deliver a state of satisfaction. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But content writing, unlike other forms of writing, is not meant to be looked at and admired. Absolutely not. It should not call attention to itself. The purpose of content is to further the journey of your audience, to answer their questions and present the next logical step. So it's really that next best conversation. If content is effective, it will make your visitors feel content. It's so cute.
So really, the goal of a novelist, a poet, or an academic publishing online is to have every word of their writing consumed. Thus, page views, time on page, those are vital key performance indicators for those types of writers. The goal of a content marketer, though, whether they're crafting an email, website copy, or blog post, is to inspire that action, that next step. Therefore, the success of a content marketer and a piece of content relies on KPIs that indicate an action was taken, such as a click-through or conversion. So we cover content marketing KPIs further in our on-demand webinar, How to Develop an Effective Content Marketing Strategy. Content, really, it's a new form of writing, born in the 21st century as businesses sought to enhance their presence online and positively influence their visitors. Though we go to great length to differentiate between authors, academics, and content writers, the basic rules of writing apply to all. In the handout section you can see today, we've included a content writing resources that you can download at any time throughout the presentation. I swear by several of these, including Grammarly, thesaurus.com, and the Purdue OWL. Bookmark these links to help get the creative juices flowing.
Those are great examples. In this webinar, we'll cover the fundamentals of this new form of writing, from structure to word choice to optimizing for search. So those are really three different things to look at. Our hope is that you will come away with the tools you need to create effective, action-oriented content. So in other words, write great content. These are all the examples.
Let's talk a bit then about how to get to know your audience. So here's some writing advice that Margaret Atwood, the author, gave to budding authors. She says, hold the reader's attention, but you don't know who the reader is, so it's like shooting fish at a slingshot in the dark. What fascinates A will bore the pants off B. So, this advice is really tongue-in-cheek, but it actually makes writing intimidating. Fortunately, content writers are not authors and do have insight into who our readers are and can take better aim with our slingshots. We have a tool that authors do not, personas. Personas are the foundation of personalized one-to-one communication. By identifying your persona's ideal online experience, who they are, what they like, and most important, what they don't like, you'll get a better understanding of who your audience are and what type of content you have to create. Here's an example here of a university persona that we've created for Focus Fran. In the handout section, please feel free to access our personas template. We also have an on-demand webinar covering in depth how to create personas, so please visit that at any time over at silvertech.com. We won't go into much greater detail on personas, but Sam, briefly, How important are personas as you strive to write great content?
So from my vantage point, my opinion, personas are actually the absolute need, the foundation before you do anything with your website or content or anything digital. Really very important to make sure that you're understanding who you're speaking to. So personas are 5 to 7 storylines about your audiences, and what they do is they give you their background. So it gives you their unique perspective, what their state of mind is, what their barriers to entry might be, and then ultimately what their ideal experience is. So you can see here, Focus Brand, this was an example of one that we did for a higher education institution, but the examples that we give have a few other industries in there as well. And so it looks at what are some of the questions that your audience would need answered before they could move to the next step. So in Focus Brand's case, it's what does this student need to know before they're going to schedule a visit to go to this particular university, and what are those frequently asked questions, and then ultimately what is her ideal online experience. If she doesn't want to talk to anybody and she wants to just book an appointment online, is that something that you're offering? So those are just a few examples of how personas can ultimately help you just by putting yourself in the mindset of the particular audience.
On to our next section then, how to write tasty, audience-centric content, and I'll explain why tasty in just a moment. As you create your personas and define your audience, it's important to acknowledge the truth about how humans consume content online. We behave like wild animals. I mean, can you believe that? Sam, there's actually research to back this up. The Palo Alto Research Center has found several similarities in how wild animals gather food to how humans collect information online.
I didn't until you told me about this, but it is fascinating research, and I would encourage folks to look it up, actually, especially for those marketers who are really trying to get folks to consume their content online. It was actually really interesting. So when we're on the search for information or buying a product online, we act like a lion on the hunt for a gazelle, and this is literally what they said in this research. As the lion stalks its prey, it can quickly assess the probability for success. If it looks like it will be an easy hunt, it attacks fast and brings down its prey. But if for whatever reason the hunt looks like it's going to pose too much of a challenge, the lion will move on and search somewhere else. Similarly, your website or blog visitors are on the hunt. They're looking for 1 or 2 specific things that they need answered. And if they can quickly assess whether your website has what they are looking for, or leave if it's going to be easier to find someplace else.
So Jacob Nielsen of the Nielsen-Norman Group, he calls website visitors information foragers. They're looking for maximum benefit for minimum effort. And this is an important concept for content writers. Too often we can get swept up in our words and become enamored by their cleverness, as I just did. Poetry is best left to the poets, and our job as content marketers is, again, just to inspire action, that next step, with our words. Nielsen suggests that we make content look like a nutritious meal and signal that it's an easy catch. Why is that?
Well, there's a couple different reasons, but people have a tendency to scan instead of read on the web. In fact, according to Nielsen-Norman, on the average web page, visitors have time to read at most on the first visit 28% of the words during the visit, and 20% is actually more likely. If they become repeat visitors and continue reading your site, they may read deeper on subsequent visits and spend a little bit more time.
It's good to keep in mind as you're writing and you're putting that content up there so you don't get swept away in believing that somebody is going to read that whole blog post that first time through. And we'll talk about how to structure to take advantage of this 28% scanning. All of the pertinent information should be there on the page, despite your visitors' tendency to scan. But organize your content so visitors can scan and still pick up the main points quickly. You want to break up your content into short paragraphs with one idea in each. You want to put conclusions at the top of the page, use section headers, and use lists. And of course, you want to use the words that your audience uses. Once you've spent the time to develop your personas, you'll have a strong sense of how they speak and their level of comfort with the terms related to your product or service. Avoid at all costs industry speak and jargon. Further, avoid words that sound empty and telling of filler.
So remember, your visitors are on the hunt for information. The wrong words can be a huge deterrent. For example, 5 words or phrases that every content writer should avoid, and I'm pretty sure that I am notoriously guilty for every single one of these, especially the first one, utilize. I use that much more frequently than I should. Enables vary, we understand that, or in today's fast-paced world. And then finally, my favorite is end user.
But you know yourself too, and I'm guilty of using these, but if you read something that starts with "in today's fast-paced world," I'm tuning it out. It's not really going to be relevant to what I'm doing. And if I'm being referred to as an end user, I mean, maybe in a technical document that makes sense, but not for website content, blog content. Further, you want to use tools like Google AdWords to find the words that your potential visitors are using to find you. Here's an example from Enchanting Marketing. They have cost-effective flights, low-fare flights, cheap flights. Now, you may, in fact, offer cost-effective flights, but your audience are searching for cheap flights. They're looking for cheap and flights. Now, another best practice here to deal with these scanners, these information foragers, your hunters, your lions, is to lead with your most important information. So we've spoken about how content writers differ from novelists, poets, and academics, but there is one type of writer with whom we do share several commonalities, and that's the journalist. Like content, news articles are typically scanned. And to ensure that news readers can get all they need from an article by scanning, journalists have adopted an approach called the inverted pyramid. Sam, you've actually studied journalism. Any insight you can give into the inverted pyramid and how a journalist writes?
Yeah, it's actually kind of a really interesting story in terms of why most news articles have the entire story packed into the first sentence or the first paragraph, but most likely the first sentence. And I don't know how many academics there are in journalism background, in journalism history, but essentially the reason why that is because before, across the United States, when we were working with telegraph wires, before the telephone and other forms of communication, there was a very real possibility that those telegraph wires could get cut. So people who were in the West trying to get information back to their publishers in the East had to fit an entire story very quickly because they never knew when those telegraph wires were going to be cut. At least that was the reason that I heard in terms of why you put the most newsworthy information at the top.
It's interesting that they did it that way to deal with the technology at the time and how the information was going to be consumed. It could be cut off. Same thing here. We're using this inverted pyramid to deal with the technology of our time, which is the internet and mobile devices and how people are just going to scan and really cut that telegraph off, essentially.
Well, that's a great thing to kind of put together. I like that.
Well, anyway, another common trait shared with journalism is the need to be direct. Complicated sentences are the purview of the novelist. Content writers should always use the active voice and avoid the passive voice. The active voice is the most direct way of communicating the meaning of your sentences. Here's an example of the active voice. The lion caught the gazelle.
And here's an example of a passive voice. The gazelle was caught by the lion. In this sentence, it's clear that the lion is the subject and responsible for the action. In the second sentence, the gazelle is the subject and receives the action. Passive sentences are appropriate for scientific writing as they allow the writer to avoid using pronouns, but the content writer is looking to inspire action here and should always use an active voice. I always see this on hospital websites. Every single time.
Really? Yeah.
Healthcare websites, it's using an active voice is one of the biggest critiques when I go back with content.
Website content best practices. Let's dive in here and give some best practices for how you should structure and write your content for your website. So now that you've identified your audience, structured your content to make it more easily consumed, you also need to concern yourself with getting found online. Ultimately, creating great content for your visitors will be what helps your search engine optimization, SEO efforts the most. If you're using language your audience would use to search for you, your content will drive plenty of search results.
So the biggest piece of advice that I can give here is don't write content for your internal staff, stakeholders, or even Google. Write it for your intended audience and think about what the user needs from that particular page and deliver those expectations. And here are some more best practices that we can share.
Don't keyword stuff. Keyword stuffing and writing content in a way that tries to include as many keywords as possible is something that Google frowns upon and will penalize sites for. Avoid doing this and focus on writing relevant content for visitors. This applies to blog posts and all web page copy, meta titles, and meta descriptions. Here's an example from Google of what not to do. So you sell custom cigar humidors, and here's content you should not put up on your website. We sell custom cigar humidors. Our custom cigar humidors are handmade. If you're thinking of buying a custom cigar humidor, please contact our custom cigar humidor specialists at custom.cigar.humidor.com. The repetition of the phrase custom cigar humidors actually starts to signal that there is something broken, that perhaps the site itself is spam. To the search engine and into the user reading that too. It just doesn't make sense to us. Avoid repetition at all costs.
What's funny is people used to get away with that, and now it just looks so weird to us. It's funny. So providing enough text. Though the goal is to create scannable content, each page should be a minimum of 250 words. If you're unable to write that much about a specific topic, perhaps it can be combined with other topics to create one page. Search engines prefer rich sites that provide adequate content for readers. If there are too many pages with not enough content, that would affect your SEO negatively. Also, another thing that is kind of the trend right now in design is to do as few words as possible on your homepage. So you've got kind of these different box areas with different call to actions and not a lot of text. Remember that in your design process, if you're going through a website redesign or you're adding text to different pages, but especially in a website redesign, your homepage does need to have that information on there. So figure out a way to get that on in some way, shape, or form, and don't just fall into that design trap of having less text on the homepage because it looks better. It will make a difference.
You want to use image tags. Be sure to fill in the alt and title tags for every image that you use on your website. These tags are necessary for both SEO and accessibility purposes. In this example, I've described my image as the How to Write Great Content webinar image, as it's the image that I used to promote this very same webinar.
Include page titles. So use words that people will use. For example, someone will likely type biology degree instead of biology program, and this goes back to our examples for higher education. Each page should have a unique title. Do not duplicate. Front load the page title with the most important information. For example, biology degree instead of about SilverTech University's biology degree. Do not put the name of your company or website in the title tag. If your site is developed appropriately, that text will automatically be appended to every title throughout the website. And use this space to explain the actual page content as well. For example, if you provide a biology degree and the CMS will automatically create it as biology degree SilverTech University. And then as always, limit the page title to 70 characters, including your business name. These are just some standard best practices, and you can find these anywhere around the web.
And of course, don't forget your meta descriptions. These will show in the search results as well as provide additional keywords for SEO. Be sure to write unique meta description for each page, and the description should be specific to the content of each page. We'll go into further depth on the topic of page titles, image tags, meta description in webinar 5 of our Inbound Summer School, where we're going to cover SEO best practices. But just something to keep in mind as you are writing great content. It'd be terrible to get something up there and not kind of fill in the back-end descriptions of your great content. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say on this one, creating copy for your website is fairly straightforward. If you follow our best practices, it's a matter of succinctly and accurately describing what you do. Creating content for your blog, podcast, webinar, or white paper requires a little bit more of an active approach, though, I would say.
Yeah, when it comes to writing great blog content, I think of Isaac Asimov and something he said. The great sci-fi writer, one of the most original minds of our modern era, he once asserted that there are no new ideas, only variations on old ideas.
That's so true.
So I think as you strive to write great content, there's no reason to stare there at a blank screen. There are plenty of good ideas out there just waiting for your variation. For example, I often look to LinkedIn and my LinkedIn groups to see what challenges my personas may be facing. I also follow several thought leaders and look to their ideas, like the Content Marketing Institute, HubSpot, etc. It's not about stealing ideas. It's about finding ones that work and using them to tell your story. Sam, any thoughts on where you would look for any blog, podcast, white paper ideas?
Yeah, so I really do love your idea of actually looking for, you look on LinkedIn for different job descriptions and see what, so we know who our target audience is, and you see what their challenges are that they're going to ask to be solved once they step into that job,
right.
And create content against that, which I've always thought was just an awesome idea. Another one that we've done before in the past that works really well is taking a look at what keywords your website is already ranking for, but maybe they would be in like the 50 or 60 range, and seeing if there's anything that you can do to write some more content around that to come up with some effective title ideas. For example, Salesforce implementation, that's one of the ones that we're currently working on and always working on. And so coming up with some great titles around that is always a good way to do it. But keywords, through the way that I get that is through Google Webmaster Tools, looking at where we're at and coming up with those titles.
So our partners over at HubSpot have shared a template for 5 common types of blog posts if you need help getting started. We'll link to the article that they shared so you can go ahead and download the templates from HubSpot. But there's the how-to post, the list-based post, the curated collection post, the SlideShare presentation post, and the newsjacking post, which I believe in this news cycle you do have to be careful of. But getting back to the idea of content writers being journalists, Sam, we've been talking a lot lately about this idea of brand journalism. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, so it's a concept that I'm actually really in love with, this concept of brand journalism. And essentially, it's finding unique ways to tell your brand story. And so for a lot of us, especially in the B2B space, it's kind of hard to come up with some really newsworthy content. We've got, especially I'll give an example of a hospital actually, a friend of mine works at, and he introduced me to this concept of brand journalism. The way that he described the story to me is essentially they were doing a core system change, which I don't know if anyone on here has ever gone through a core system change, but essentially the system that holds all of your patient records, all of the ways that your doctors access patient records, basically the system that the nurses are typing on the hospital floor, that was the system that was getting changed over. And so it takes a whole company to come in, and I think they had an extra 100 people with the technology that they were switching over on the floor, with the nurses, with the doctors, just there helping them to answer questions. And it was for a period of like a month and a half just to get everyone ready as all the different shifts came in and out. And so you could have told the story about how there was going to be a huge technology shift.
Yeah, that seems like the natural story.
The natural story. Yeah. No one would read that,
no.
Right? No one really cares about whether or not your core system is one or the other, A or B. So what my friend did was he actually looked at, where is the story here? And it turns out that for an extra 100 people on the floor at all times, they actually need more food, right? Right. And they actually had to close down a doctor's lounge, and they turned it into a cantina for all of the people who were going to be on the floor. And there was one woman, and I can't even make this up, her name was Big Red, that's what she was referred to as, that fed them all. And he did the entire story about how it takes this one woman to feed everyone and to keep everyone happy while they're doing this huge technology change. And it got such massive feedback, like great feedback from her and her family and just other folks, because they all knew her and they knew what a great woman she was, and they thought it was such a great thing that the hospital would do a story on her and the efforts that she had done. So it was kind of a really cool story, and just an out-of-the-box way of thinking of how you could tell a particular story. And we have all kinds of things like that every day here. So it was an exciting prospect.
Because at the same time, the story of the core technology changeover, if you needed to tell that story, it was told. It was just, your main characters were flipped. That's all. I
love it. Yeah, exactly.
So we've spent a great deal of time covering content for website, your blog, but let's not forget one of the most valuable tools we as marketers have. That's email. Many of the same rules apply. Content should be scannable, relevant, and answer your audience's question, but primacy needs to be placed on the subject line.
According to Convince and Convert, 35% of email recipients open email based on the subject line alone. I don't think this is surprising, especially to anyone here on this webinar. When someone signs up for your e-newsletter or offers their email at a trade show or event, you should treat it like a sacred invitation. Please don't be misleading, and please don't oversend.
So the main rule is to keep your subject line short and sweet. 50 characters, 6 to 10 words tops. And you can see this in research here from Retention Science, that once you go beyond 10 words, your open rates start to drop. And then, if you can at all, personalize. You see here, further research from Retention Science, email open rates with the first name in the subject line, much higher open rate, with 18.3% without 15.7%. Still talking about email, I'm getting ahead of myself there. Sam, I just wanted to mention one other best practice, A/B testing.
Yes.
Can you share any A/B testing best practices as we're focusing on subject lines?
Yeah, so A/B testing is a really great way to kind of test your content and test your content ideas. The biggest advice that I can give to anyone is to make sure that you're only changing one thing at a time, though. It is so tempting to start to change lots of things because you want to understand how different things are working, but be consistent and you have to be adamant about only changing one thing. An A/B test is not a multivariate test. Always track too. If you have a big enough email list where you can always A/B test, it's really, sometimes even the smallest amount of percentage change will make a big difference to your bottom line. So take a look at what you can potentially do there, and just remember that it doesn't always have to be perfect. You can actually use it through, use your theories through an A/B test. But yeah, so that's the basics of what I have for that.
Perfect. So that's about bringing us towards the end. The writing resources document in the handouts has links to several key resources that I use and I think will help you ensure that your content writing is professional and polished. Today we also discussed the importance of just number one, develop those personas, get to know your audience, understand that your audience are wild animals, they're scanning your web pages, foraging for information, structure content to put the most important information first.
So as always, use words that your audience uses. Use the active voice and not the passive voice. Don't forget your alt tags, page titles, meta descriptions. Add your variation on good ideas. The good ideas are out there and you can add your variation. And then always test subject lines in emails.
Excellent.
Yes.
That's it for today.
Yeah, sounds
Thank you
good.
so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.